Sexto Congreso Internacional de Educación Médica, CIEM2021, Educación Médica en tiempos de pandemia. 28 y 29 de mayo de 2021, modalidad virtual. El evento más importante de la educación médica en el Perú. Con la participación de destacados conferencistas nacionales e internacionales. Vive la experiencia de este importante evento. Cursos precongreso. Conferencias en el auditorio principal. Reuniones institucionales. Exposición de libros. Trabajos científicos. Stand de exposiciones. Y mucho más. Además, se desarrollarán los siguientes ejes temáticos: cambios en la educación y la práctica médica, práctica clínica e internado, formación de médicos especialistas, competencias digitales, competencias en salud pública y atención primaria, bioética en la educación y la práctica clínica, investigación científica, tecnológica e innovación, evaluación formativa y sumativa en educación médica. Aspefam les da la bienvenida.
Muy buenos días, estimados participantes, organizadores de este Sexto Congreso Internacional de Educación Médica y de manera muy especial a nuestro conferencista de esta actividad, Formación en atención primaria, un imperativo para el mundo post-COVID-19, el doctor Shailey Prasad, de los Estados Unidos, a quien en este momento me voy a referir. El doctor Prasad pertenece a la cátedra de Carlson de Salud Global y es director ejecutivo del Centro para la Salud Global y Responsabilidad Social de la Universidad de Minnesota, profesor y vicepresidente de Educación en el Departamento de Medicina Familiar y Salud Comunitaria en la Universidad de Minnesota, profesor adjunto de la Escuela de Salud Pública y miembro del Instituto sobre el Medio Ambiente de la Universidad de Minnesota. También es profesor invitado honorario en la Universidad de Ciudad de Cabo, Sudáfrica, y la Universidad Udayana de Prasad, Indonesia. Ha sido incluido en la Academia de Excelencia en la beca de educación de la Universidad de Minnesota. El doctor Prasad es codirector de la Rosenberger Leadership Academy, un programa de capacitación en liderazgo basado en cohortes de la Universidad de Minnesota. Es codirector del Centro Nacional de Recursos para Refugiados, Inmigrantes y Migrantes, financiado por los CDC, y el consorcio Northern Pacific Global Health, financiado por el NIH Fogarty. El doctor Prasad ha trabajado en áreas desatendidas durante 3 décadas como médico. Ha realizado investigaciones sobre servicios de salud y se ha dedicado a la educación en todas las disciplinas. Participa activamente en el crecimiento de la formación académica en investigación en salud global y atención primaria, en diversas partes de África, India, Tailandia y América del Sur. También ha estado involucrado en el fortalecimiento académico y la capacitación de mentores en varias universidades. Es un honor para mí el poder presentarlo a él en esta actividad, en esta mañana, y estamos seguros que su disertación será de mucho interés y de mucha utilidad para todos los participantes. Cabe señalar, antes de darle la palabra al doctor Prasad, que los participantes van a poder realizar sus preguntas en el chat y vamos a irlas procesando para poder proporcionarlas al conferencista y poder obtener sus respuestas en el momento oportuno. Bienvenido, Dr. Shailey Prasad.
Thank you, Dr. Lopez. It's my pleasure to be here. I really appreciate this opportunity, and I want to thank the organizers for inviting me to do this presentation. I hope this becomes a good conversation rather than me just speaking. My particular thanks to two of my friends who are in the audience, Dr. Sofia Cuba, who's a dear friend for many years now, and Dr. Gustavo Franco, who's also a dear friend. I'm excited that they're in the audience. I feel energized seeing them here. So today, my job is to give you a presentation of why primary care education is an important thing for us to consider in the future. I'm going to share my screen. Good.
Excuse me, Dr. Prasad. Excuse me. I think that we have to wait a few seconds for the interpretation.
Okay.
Please excuse me.
No problems. No problems. I'll wait. Dr. Lopez, you let me know when I can get started.
Yes, I will tell you.
Okay.
Alberto, Diony, ¿están por acá por el canal de español? Ah, ok. Entonces, Alberto, ya iniciamos, ¿ok? En cuanto el señor doctor Shailey empieza a hablar, puedes interpretar, ¿ok?
Entonces, ¿está solucionado el problema para poder iniciar?
¿Confirmado, Alberto, por favor? Listo. Te escucho, Diony. Ahorita este primer bloque, ¿en quién empieza? ¿Tú o Alberto? Ah, Diony. Ok, Diony. Entonces, atenta, porfa, que ya iniciamos, ¿ok?
Bien, muchas gracias. Entonces vamos a dar inicio.
Listo, ahora sí. Perdón.
Doctor,
Okay.
You can continue, please.
Okay, thank you. Like I was saying, I'm particularly thankful for Dr. Sofia Cuba and Dr. Gustavo Franco, who are in the audience here. They've been dear friends of mine for a few years now, and I appreciate their being here. My thanks to the interpreters again, Diony and Alberto. Hopefully I make sense. Let me know if I need to slow down, okay? And with that, I'm going to share my screen. Dr. Lopez, can you see my screen? Yes? Okay. My job today is to talk.
Yes, it's okay.
Okay. My job today is to talk about primary care training, particularly family medicine training, and why it is an imperative in the post-COVID-19 world. I know we haven't come to the post-COVID world yet, but I think it's important for us to consider some of the important things for us to plan on in the future of medical education. And again, my name is Shailey Prasad. I'm from the Center for Global Health and Social Responsibility. I'm a professor in family medicine and community health at the University of Minnesota. And that's my email, shailey@umn.edu. If you have any questions about my presentations or anything else, feel free to contact me. So today, what I'm hoping to do is to give you an overview of what we should be doing. What I would like to start with is, where have we been in the field of medical education? And then look at what went wrong and what we need to do in the future. So where have we been? I'd like to divide it into three phases. The first one is before 1900s. Medical education was more of an apprenticeship. You went and attached yourself to a learned person who was practicing medicine, and you learned the skill from them. In many ways, that is still the case, but it was very unorganized. And there are many institutions around the world, including University San Marcos in Peru, which is the oldest university in the Americas, that did a lot in trying to standardize medical education. I would also like to emphasize that there was this premise of what we would call a social contract between society and medical education. What I mean by that is the understanding was that the institutions that produce the doctors was serving the community, so that the community benefits from the training of medical doctors. That makes sense, right? The fact that a social contract is a very important point of medical education is something important to keep in mind. We can definitely ask the question, have we overall been satisfying a social contract with society, or have we missed many things? Moving on, after the 1900s was what I would call a standardization phase, where there was an importance given to making education more standardized so that the community would get to know who they're getting as a doctor. In the US, there was what's called the Flexner report. Abraham Flexner in 1910 came up with a report that talked about the importance of standardization, importance of teaching in a large institution. And its influence has continued throughout the US and Canada and many parts of America and the world. We have the model where people did 2 years of pre-clinical training and then 2 years of clinical. This is a model that has continued strongly across various universities, various medical schools. And it's remained more or less the same for the last about 100 years plus. One of the other important things that this created was a slow growth of specialization. And again, I'm not saying specialization is bad. Specialization is very important in the field of medical education. But the growth of specialization that the standardizations created has continued very significantly. And we'll come to that in a minute. And so after that has been the important growth of the current stage. The current stage has been, in the last 20 years or so, there has been a push towards more practical training, where we expect that students learn application of the knowledge that they have gotten. And don't get me wrong, this is very important. But one of the challenges has been that people have asked the question, is there enough critical thinking going on amongst medical students? Do they get to the why are we doing this questions in medical education, or are they just doing it because somebody showed them how to do it? There's also been a lot of comments about new students, that the generation of students that we have now are different than the generations of students we've had before. And there is more conversation about mental health, about burnout, about balanced life in this. I think that that conversation sometimes minimizes the role of students. It puts down students, and I'm not very comfortable with it. I feel that this generation is just as important, just as vibrant, just as brilliant as past generations. So we need to keep that in mind too. So this, in many ways, is an interesting time in medical education. The newer models have led to newer pedagogical tools, like teaching by Twitter, or games, or online and small group case-based discussions, which are all very important, very interesting. There has also been significant interest being placed on how much demand we are putting on the students. We are putting more information towards the students, and majority of that probably is not needed. We teach, for example, the Krebs cycle so many times. And don't get me wrong, Krebs cycle is important. But is it needed for us to memorize every step of the Krebs cycle? I would rather they know where to pull up the Krebs cycle on their iPhone or Samsung phone or whatever phone they're using, rather than ask them to memorize every step of the Krebs cycle and look at the practical application of the Krebs cycle rather than memorizing it forever. There is also a huge question that has come up. Are we really teaching our students about the meaning and purpose of being a doctor? Or is it something that is forgotten? Are people forgetting the meaning and purpose of being a doctor so much so that the burnout is much more stronger? And that, I think, is very important to consider as we are talking about the future of care. So with this background, I'd like to take us to the next step, which is a huge stress test that has occurred around the world. And I don't have to tell you how bad it was. Everyone in this audience, including me, has been significantly affected by COVID-19. And COVID-19 was unfortunately the biggest stress test any health system in the world could have had till now. Combined with COVID-19 was another stress test. George Floyd's murder happened a few miles from my office here in Minnesota. And I recognize that there are other people who were killed with the supremacy angle around the world, particularly in the US, but around the world. But George Floyd's murder was like a match was being lit. It was like a tipping factor that led to the conversation about what are we doing about equity in our health systems. COVID-19 has also been shown to be one of the that exposed the issue about health equity in our populations. In every country in the world, we have seen that the poor and the underserved are affected more because of COVID-19. And George Floyd's murder seemed to have asked us that question strongly again. And these two stress tests should give us an important pause to ask the questions, are we really taking care of our communities? Are we really satisfying the social contract medical education has with society? Or are we just growing our field without concern to the society that we are working in? And this is the premise in which we should be working in the future. One of the important concerns has been, and this was an essay that came out of Italy when Italy was hit by COVID, that healthcare systems around the world were getting to be too much person-centric, too much concentrating on the individual person in front of them, rather than being community-centric. That we have forgotten that it's important to take care of populations. There has been a growth of precision medicine, more targeted approaches. And don't get me wrong, it's important to keep that in mind. But in our push to achieve that individualized care, we have forgotten communities. We've forgotten where they belong. And I'm not blaming one health system or the other. This is around the world. The US is hugely a problem in this. We have not done a good job in the US about being community-centric. And so much of the problems we are seeing in COVID is because we have garnered our attention to be really good at individual care. Again, don't get me wrong, individual care is important, but we have done that while we have compromised a community-centric approach. So then here comes primary care. And I want to go back a little bit and say, what exactly do we mean by primary care? And I like to emphasize that the best definition I would like to use here is what Barbara Starfield used years ago. Barbara Starfield was a pediatrician from the US who emphasized the 4 C's of primary care. The first one being of first contact, the first time you're seeing a patient. The second one, which I think is a superpower of primary care, continuity. So you get to know the patient really well, not just in one episode of care. The third one is a comprehensive approach towards a patient rather than a piecemeal, partial approach towards a patient's care. We look at the whole person in the context of what's going on in his life or her life, rather than, oh, there is a small organ that's going wrong. And the fourth one, coordination of care across various levels of care. So these 4 C's are the classic tenets of primary care. Now, I would like to add another one. We can call it the Prasad C, or you can call it anything you want. I would like to emphasize the importance of one more C, that of context. What I mean by that is all of the above mentioned C's are very important in delivery of primary care, but the context in which we deliver care is important. And that contexts include families, communities, new stressors, new diseases, new conditions, new places of care. And that flexibility is very important to consider when we're talking about the future of primary care. This is an article that just came out earlier this month. This is in the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine. And the statement from this is very important to keep in mind. Primary care is the only healthcare component where an increased supply is associated with better population health and more equitable outcomes. And I'd like to emphasize those two parts, better population health and more equitable outcomes. If we in medical education want to take care of communities, we need to take care of communities. And primary care is the main way we can do that. And we combine that with the push for equity. So your care is not dependent on how much money you have or what part of town you come from or who you're connected with. That we create that equity of care that takes care of everybody. And primary care is the only such specialty that is shown to improve the value in any health system. I'm not in any way saying that other specialties are not important, but it's important to keep in mind that the distribution is important. What I mean by that is a 50-50 distribution, 50% of the workforce, healthcare workforce, being primary care, and 50% all other specialties. This is shown to be the best mix of best value and, very importantly, the lowest cost of care. So in any condition, if you have this mix, you are achieving that parity where you're achieving good population health and really good equitable outcomes. So how are we doing? Overall, not good. In US, I can say we are doing very poorly. We need to be supplying more primary care. My university is one of the best in the country in sending people to family medicine, but we send about 17% of our medical students into family medicine. We need to do more. In many parts of the world, with a few exceptions, there is really poor outcomes, poor numbers being sent to family medicine. In Latin America, there is wide variety. In Europe also there is some variation. In sub-Saharan Africa, there are places with no family medicine at all, same in Southeast Asia. But that is changing. The landscape has changed in the last 15 to 20 years. There is more emphasis being placed on the importance of family medicine. And I see Peru as one of those areas where there is a fledgling of family medicine. And I think we need to support that more, because if we want to achieve good population health and good equity, we need this. So this is an imperative. We need more family medicine physician training. We need to emphasize the context and keep in mind This is important because we will have more diseases beyond COVID. Climate change is going to push us to more significant health challenges. And we need our primary care workforce to be ready for it in One Health paradigms, in planetary health paradigms, and very importantly, in primary care, we are creating a bridge between clinical medicine and public health. And that is an important step for the future of healthcare in communities. So what should be different? We should have more public health training, primary care being the bridge between clinical sciences and public health, rather than public health being its own discipline that is split away from clinical sciences. We need to train our future physicians to be more adaptive in their learning. What I mean by that is they should be willing to be adapting to situations that come their way, rather than this is exactly how you practice for the next 30 years. Primary care is a lot about uncertainty because we don't know what we're going to get. And more importantly, we don't know what the future brings. And we need to be comfortable that the future is going to throw challenges our way, and we need to equip our students in that. Primary care should be more integrative, disciplinary integration, workforce integration, and also integration in where we work. And I truly believe that this will drive the why questions of the meaning and purpose in our lives. And with that, my presentation is over. And I'm going to stop sharing to open myself for questions.
Muchas gracias, doctor Prasad. Para los participantes que se han unido en los últimos minutos, se les hace presente que pueden realizar sus preguntas por el chat. Y acá tengo una primera pregunta para el doctor Prasad, de la doctora Sofía Cuba. Países como el Perú y otros en Latinoamérica no tienen especialización obligatoria para los médicos. Usualmente nuestros generalistas están en el primer nivel de atención sin un entrenamiento en posgrado en medicina familiar. ¿Cómo se puede hacer este cambio, o el cambio que queremos? ¿Es posible para los países de ingresos medios o medios bajos lograrlo?
I think that question is for Dr. Kuba, right?
Yes, doctor. Sí, doctor Prasad, ¿podría responder la pregunta? O repito la pregunta. Países como Perú y otros en Latinoamérica no tienen... okay.
No, I got the question. And I think that's a very important question, because one of the interesting things that is being asked is, how do we now create enough of a primary care workforce that takes care of communities, particularly in low-income countries or middle-income countries? And my answer is, training primary care is actually cheaper than training specialists, number one. So we need to do that more. Number two, achieving primary care coverage is going to be different in different places. There are examples, for example, in Malawi, where there is more emphasis being given to outreach work, community health workers, extenders, physician extenders, and nurses, to increase the primary care penetrance into communities. That could be a model. I am of the firm belief that family medicine education is very important. But if you look at the ratio of family medicine doctors for the community being served, family medicine doctors will have to work as part of teams that will now increase coverage to larger populations.
Muchas gracias, doctor Prasad. Hay una pregunta de la participante Flor Jimena Deza, ¿no? How should we train our student in primary care? I meant maybe having a first approximation with a family medicine rotation as a student.
Flor, that is a wonderful question. I think the importance to keep in mind is we need exposure to what primary care means early in education. So having medical student rotations in family medicine is very important. We have models here, for example, where we have exposed early on students to family medicine that are more likely to go into family medicine. We have ways where we have done community-based training where students are put in rural areas for up to 9 months. And that has shown to significantly increase people wanting to go into family medicine. And very importantly, our institutions, our large medical schools have to emphasize why family medicine is important. And this is a challenge. This is a challenge in the US. We have institutions that minimize family medicine, who put down family medicine, put down primary care, and highlight some of the specialties. We have to absolutely emphasize the importance of primary care, of family medicine. Yes, Flor's comment is very important. Maybe we as doctors have to understand why it is important too. And this is important. Flor's point is very important. And here is my quick answer to that. Primary care education, family medicine education is shown to increase quality and decrease costs. Those are two important things. It's also shown to improve equity of care. So if you combine these three, there should be no argument as to why we need more family medicine or primary care trained people. I've been asked this question before, whether I'm against specialization. No, I'm not. My wife is a specialist, so I have to be careful about that. But very importantly, we need specialization. My question is, while we are pursuing some part of our medical students going into specialization, are we emphasizing primary care also? So that is the important question for us. We cannot be emphasizing only specialization. We can't be romanticizing only specialization.
Muchas gracias, doctor Prasad. Queda abierta la posibilidad de alguna pregunta adicional y mientras se animan los participantes, voy a aprovechar también la posibilidad que tengo de hacer una pregunta. Estimado doctor Prasad, ¿cuáles considera usted que deberían ser las mínimas exigencias de participación del gobierno, del Estado, o sea, del sistema de salud, del sistema de servicios de salud, con la universidad para poder viabilizar una enseñanza adecuada en atención primaria? Nuestro país, como muchos en Latinoamérica, tienen sistemas fragmentados y la distribución de los establecimientos no está necesariamente organizada como para poder brindar todos los servicios y hacerse cargo del cuidado de una población. ¿Qué considera usted que el Estado debería priorizar o podríamos como universidades exigirle mínimamente para ayudar en esta?
That's a wonderful question, Dr. Lopez. I would like to present it as a three-part thing. Essentially, one part is a factory, okay? A factory that produces material. And in this case, it's a factory that produces primary care physicians. which means our medical schools. That's one. Our medical schools are the factory. The second is a market where the products of the factory go to work. So if you have medical schools that produce primary care doctors, they need to go somewhere to work. If there is no emphasis being placed on primary care, what's going to happen to the factory? It's going to shut down. Creating that market is the main thing that the government needs to do. And creating that market would be by asking the question, what is the healthcare structure of the whole country? And when I say healthcare structure, I'm talking about public health, primary care as a base, on top of which now you have specialized structure. So in very simplistic terms, if we were to take of Peru in general, what is the distribution needed for good primary care services all across the country, not just in important places, not just in Lima or Arequipa or something like that. It's all over the country. And then how do you now vertically integrate services so that there is appropriate utilization of all the specialties that are needed? And so the creation of that market where the products can go is the role of the government. And when you talk about a government's healthcare priorities, that is something important to keep in mind. And in places where primary care has flourished, there has been that importance given by the government, and that slow growth of primary care has occurred. I'll give Ethiopia as an example, and I know Ethiopia is going through a bad situation right now, but about 15 years ago, the Ethiopian government decided that primary care is needed. It's a very important part of healthcare system. And they started the process, and now they're 10 years ahead of the neighboring countries. So there is more value attached to primary care in Ethiopia than in many other countries around them. So the government has a huge role to play in this. So I think that is something very important to keep in mind. I see a question from Sophia. How many schools of medicine have family and community medicine in the US? Do you think it's important for medical schools to have family medicine departments? My quick answer, Sophia, is, and you know this, is yes, because we can't treat family medicine as a substandard discipline. We cannot make them as lesser than other disciplines. So medical schools have a role to play in this, have an important role to play in this. The minute they don't do it, it means they're not valuing community-based population health. Many schools in the US have family medicine and community health departments. But I got to tell you, there are many big schools, and there is a medical student who has called them orphan schools, the big name schools like Harvard, who do not have primary care, who do not have family medicine rather. This is an important consideration. It doesn't mean how prestigious your school is, but if you don't have family medicine as a core part of your primary care workforce creation, then you're not really addressing population health well. And that, I think, is an important consideration.
Bien, muchas gracias, estimado doctor Prasad, por su brillante exposición y también su disposición con las respuestas a las inquietudes planteadas. Acá hay una última pregunta, ¿no? ¿Cuán importante es incentivar a los estudiantes de pregrado sobre proyectos de investigación en atención primaria en salud? De la doctora Katia Loyola.
Katia, that's a wonderful question. And I think that's something important to keep in mind. And the reason I'm bringing this up is a lot of times when people think about family medicine or primary care, they don't think about research. They think about you go and work and that's it. But asking those scientific questions is very important from a community viewpoint. And Sophia Kuba will tell you that we've been partnering and trying to get more primary care-based research. Now, primary care research may not be in a lab, may not be with newer organisms, but it's understanding the interface of our health sciences in communities. And yes, a lot of these research has got very strong connections to public health research. It's very important to keep that in mind because we want our brightest to still come into family medicine and understand that research is an important part of what we do in family medicine. So your question is very important. Starting the question of what is important to our communities is an important place to doing family medicine. And I'll also like to acknowledge one more person in the audience. It's my friend Nayurka Diaz, who is going to be one of your next speakers. Hi, Nayurka. She'll give you more examples of what they've been doing in Cuba in primary care. And it's amazing some of the work they're doing in primary care there.
Bien. Muchas gracias, estimado doctor Prasad. Disculpe, continúa, por favor.
Just a quick mention, Dr. Lopez. I'm sorry I'm not there in person with you. A lot of times when I do a talk, and I hope to have the conversation continue. And I would have loved to be there with you to talk more about this topic and answer more questions. Unfortunately, I'm not able to. So what I would recommend is, if you have any questions, feel free to contact me. Otherwise, I hope to meet you all someday. I'm putting my email in the chat box too.
Muchísimas gracias, doctor Prasad. Estamos seguros que tanto por su excelente ponencia como su disposición a compartir experiencias, compartir información, opinión y aportes para el fortalecimiento de la educación médica en atención primaria en nuestro país. De esta manera, estamos entonces concluyendo con esta interesante actividad, agradeciendo muy en especial al doctor Shailey Prasad y a cada uno de los participantes que nos ha honrado con su presencia. Muchas gracias.